Alright, this is another one of these that was a lot of things in the idea stage. But, like, way back before ended up doing it with Alpha Dog, we were going to do Bully, the Larry Clark movie, with Mean Creek. And then once I did Bully with Alpha Dog, it was like, um, the vague plan was to possibly do Mean Creek with Elephant. But the more I thought about that, the more it's like those are probably a little too different. And Elephant seems like it could, whatever that may be better off paired up with something else, something more like it. And then there's stuff like the Crispin Glover Keanu Reeves movie River's Edge from the '80s might really fit with Mean Creek as well. But then people started talking about there's the new movie that's I don't know if it's being filmed or was already filmed with John Travolta playing this stalker or something that Fred Durst is directing, and everybody's like, Fred Durst is directing now, and you have your people in there every now and then that actually say, "Oh yeah, did you know he actually did this movie and The Long Shots, the football movie with Ice Cube?" So with that kind of freshly back in my mind, I decided why not show off the education of Charlie Banks a little bit. So that's how we ended up here, despite all the other possibilities. So yeah, let's just go into it. Starting with Mean Creek. Now I actually had never heard of this until I rented The Machinist right when it came out, and the trailer for this was on it, and I just found it really intriguing, like, immediately. And it was just seemed like the type of movie that I would just really go for, but even with that many expectations going in, it was not what I expected in a really good way. Starting with the fact that it's actually like this masterclass in pacing is what this movie is, kind of first and foremost, because you get the whole there's a fair amount of characters here that we kind of have to get to know, that we'll see go through many changes as the events transpire, with a very young cast at that. But the thing here is that we're able to really, it's very, very character driven and very much revolves around each individual one and how they would react or where they come from or anything like that. Yet at the same time, the plot feels like it's constantly moving, because you would think a movie so character driven, you'd kind of get some mundane scenes that are just kind of introduction or whatever. But the brilliant thing that Jacob Esses, the writer director, pulls off is that every single scene leading up to them calling George and setting up the plan, every single scene involves them talking about what exactly they're going to do. There's like, it feels like there's no filler scene or no kind of mundane introductory scene. It's every scene is talking about the point we're going to get towards, yet somehow manages to also fit in the character development within these scenes. And it's really incredibly done. How there's just that constant progression that needs to be going while this happens, and starting with Rory Culkin as Sam, who is the bully. The opening scene is him being bullied by Josh Beck's character George, and the amazing thing that Rory Culkin does here is that he's the one, like, there's gonna be a lot of, like, things getting out of hand in this movie and people getting really, really emotive or getting really angry, or just really going for it. And Rory Culkin's job here is to basically not do any of that, but also feel like the entire weight of this whole situation is on him. Especially being that he's one of the youngest characters in it, only kind of adds to that. Because we first see the different sides of him, like we see the little brother side of him when he's hanging out with Rocky, which he plays really well, which he's a Culkin, he's used to being a little brother, so, but the thing, like those little details, like the way, Rocky's talking to him about George, And then when he's explaining it later to Millie in the tree, he's basically like repeating Rocky's words, and you can just kind of see like there's sort of that admiration for the older brother there, just in that little detail. Um, but then there's also, like the love struck kid or the kid with a crush, the scenes with Millie when they go on their date, or the way he reacts to being dared to kiss her and stuff like that. But then when this movie goes to its dark places, he's like the first one to really, like when George is laying there and they're all just kind of spread apart here contemplating, he's the one that we kind of really focus on. Like, even, I mean, I suppose, for a realism factor, sure, but I mean, I don't think we even need him spraying vomit everywhere to show us exactly how he felt about this. He was doing just fine, just kind of sitting there taking it in, and then the scene where he runs after Millie and just like, because he has nothing else to do or can stop this, just kind of grabs her hand. It's just really, he does so many small things here that leave such a huge impact, and especially being surrounded by most of the actors being like incredibly present and emotive, and he just really kind of takes the center in a very subtle way that really works. And then you look at the two performances, the really two standout performances here. I actually want to start with Scott McAvoy, who you probably know as Scotty from Eurotrip. Um, Interestingly enough, despite the fact that he's probably easily most well known for a movie like Eurotrip, he's like 150% award worthy in this. We're talking like big award worthy, because it might seem like a bit of cliche at first, because he's the guy who kind of takes control, and you can just the first time we see him, just the way he struts around, we can tell that he's kind of the self-appointed leader of this group, and there's something really in control and authoritative about him. But then once we see him with his older brother Kyle, we realize that this comes from a place that we've seen many times before, where he's all big and bad around all these younger kids, because when he's around people like his brother or Jasper, he just seems so small. And there's sort of I don't necessarily know if, well, yeah, I guess you could say Kyle bullies him, but not necessarily to the extremes, in the extreme way that you'd probably think when you think of this setup usually. But it's just enough that it's very clear very quickly why Marty is the way that he is around people that are smaller and easier to control around when he's around them. Um, but the great thing about this relationship with him and Kyle, who's played by a good actor named Brandon Williams, who you've probably seen pop up in random things, is that they both find a way working together, to go so far beyond that usual, little brother's actions are influenced by the older brother, something we kind of see in a totally opposite way with Sam and Rocky. But they both find a way to really kind of go against that cliche, and it's especially, in the later parts, once he's told Kyle what's happened, and it's like there's just such a turning point for this storyline there, and the way that he actually, and it doesn't feel forced, like there needs to be some conclusion between these two brothers or some closure or something. It feels really natural the way that Kyle actually does. I guess you could say he's looking out for him, but just in like the smallest ways possible, or in unexpected ways. Like there's that quiet moment where they're just standing there in silence, and he just kind of hands him the gun, and it's kind of like, this is the part where you expect the older brother to stop the little brother from making a bigger bad decision than he already did, or tries to stop him from turning to a life of crime on his way to Mexico or something. But he just doesn't try to stop him. He just kind of lets it happen. And we think maybe there's always that, do they actually hate each other thing. But then there's that one moment when he just kind of stops Marty from getting in the car, like he's going to say something, and then he just doesn't. But the thing is that they say so much by saying nothing at the same time, and it's just this really kind of unexpected thing between the two of them that you would from the times we see them when he catches Marty with the gun, and we see him as like this generic bully character when he's seems to be anything but. And like I said, the fact that they hardly have to really show anything to make that so apparent is so well done, and really speaks to the performances too. And as an actor, he's really got to go to some dark places because He's the one that's like constantly pushing for this. Like eventually, even Rocky, changes his mind. But Marty's the one that is ready to go no matter what. Mainly because we know this is his chance to really get back at somebody. Rocky says that it's weird that Marty's so devoted to this because he doesn't even have a grudge against him. But then again, there is that opening scene with them when Rocky's explaining who George is, and Marty says, "Yeah, I hate that guy." So there's a little something there. It's like he knows what George is capable of. So, but it does feel more like it's coming from the direction of his relationship with Kyle has brought him to this, or just in general after his dad killing himself and the way his mom has reacted to it. Just a kind of a general fuck the world vibe. There are so many things that could get Marty to this point that probably have all added up and just kind of peak at this moment of, I can take all this shit out on this mean fat kid, and I would have to feel no remorse because this kid's a piece of shit. But these dark places that he goes, like the scene after everything's happened and he comes over and they've all already decided they're gonna tell the truth, and when he's talking to Rocky, we can just kind of see that all this stuff has. George was supposed to be his release, but now it's just like kind of the straw that broke the camel's back for him to going to a point of no return. So just the complete and total opposite effect that he wanted out of this, if he even knows exactly what he wanted out of this. But yeah, you just kind of see that in his eyes, where it's kind of like you just know, just by watching him now, not even saying anything, that this isn't going to be much of a happy ending, at least for him. Well, obviously for nobody, but especially for him. And it's just so bleak that him robbing the store is the last shot we get of him. That's something that's just kind of always stuck with me in a really deep way. And he's also got the most chilling line of the movie, which is when George is drowning and he's just watching it happen, and his response is, because obviously we know from watching him that all George has really wanted is friends, regardless of how much he loses his cool. And Marty's line is his friends have his back, and that's why you're in the water, because you have none, as they're watching him drown and die. And it's really, I don't think they know that he's going to die at this point, but it's just a really dark moment, but just works in such a powerful way. And while we're on the subject, the other performance I was talking about, obviously, would be Josh Peck as George. And at first, you might think it's a bit of, like, shock casting, because this was, like, obviously, he was really big on Nickelodeon. He had, like, the Amanda Show, he was in Snow Day, he was in Max Keeble's Big Move, stuff like that. And this was, Mean Creek came out the same year that Drake and Josh started. The first year that Drake and Josh aired. So it's like, oh, we're gonna get, the friendly Nickelodeon face that all the kids are familiar with, and make him the big foul-mouthed antagonist here. But no, there is something so incredible about Josh Peck's performance and what he's able to bring to this, to where it feels anything but that. It is a little surprising to where it's like, I'm really surprised Nickelodeon didn't put a stop to this before he made this movie. It's like, I'm really surprised Nickelodeon didn't have Josh Peck's agent assassinated for getting him this part. But the thing here is that it's just such a perfect realistic portrayal, because we've all known that kid like George, where he's like, nobody particularly likes him, but he's like, he will literally say anything if it makes him sound cool or makes it sound like he knows everything. And but even when he's like so blatantly lying, like the thing about the fact that he's smoked before, and Marty calls him out and says like, they don't make menthols, so you're probably lying, and he gets so defensive, and just continues on with his lie here, just so everybody thinks that he's cool, and it's like I said, we've all met that person. If you went to a public school, you knew at least a couple of them. But the thing here is that there is the brilliant thing that Peck does and the writing does is that even though George is so relentlessly mean, we somehow find a way to where there's a middle ground where we hate him as much as we sympathize for him. They like find an equal footing because like take the sandwich scene, when they're just eating lunch or whatever, and they're trying to he just does so many mean things he can't even remember why he attacked Clyde with a baseball bat. And as they're trying to figure that out, Sam is trying to call him out. And George goes from, happy and getting along with them to, Sam, I know it's your birthday, but shut your trap. And it's like, it sucks because it's like, this guy probably could have the friends that he so desperately wants. But then there are just these small things that push him, to lose his cool. And it's like you realize as you watch him, it's like he's probably been so close so many times to having the friends that he wants, and he'll fuck it up with stuff like this. And it doesn't really do too much to explain where that comes from in him. But the interesting thing the movie is able to pull off is that it doesn't really seem to matter that much, where exactly it comes from. It's more of how the character himself is dealing with it and trying to kind of it's almost like he's intentionally trying to combat it by trying to make friends, which is why they so easily invite him to the party. I mean, Marty knew that immediately. Marty was like, he acts that way, but the second we invite him to something, he's gonna be all over it. It's like he's that transparent, but that's just the way it is. And then we get to the moment on the boat, this unforgettable game of Truth or Dare, that eventually results in Marty letting him know exactly what's going on. And once again, this really even takes that further, that middle ground we found, where it's like we kind of sympathize for him, but we still just hate him. When, after Marty tells him what's going on, everybody just kind of confesses all at once, he starts to cry. Like, he doesn't do, like, the full-on crying, but it's that build-up. It's amazing what Josh Beck does in this scene. It really is. But the thing here is that after this, he snaps and goes on that rampage, that enormous rant. We even have Josh Peck in the days of Drake and Josh saying cunt to Millie. It's unbelievable, but the thing is that in this scene, he goes after everybody, we see the process, we see that he turns to this anger out of defense because he was about to cry, and it's like, better to lash out than people see me, get emotional about it or seem weak or something. So it's like, and he uses like everything he knows about these people to hurt them, whether it be Clyde's dad's or Marty's dad's suicide. But the thing is that even though he goes to such an extreme, and we've grown to hate him because he does this, there's still a sympathy in there because we see how he got to that point to where we realize he's not necessarily just doing all this to be cruel and hurt everybody, but he's doing it to basically in defense for himself, because that's the only way he can think to react to this. And it's like it's as heartbreaking as it is infuriating, and it's just the way he was able to pull that off is amazing. So yeah, and even having those moments in there, like the way he says "bring on the penis" is exactly the way he'd deliver a line on Drake and Josh. But manages to throw all this stuff into this performance, and it's really incredible. So, yeah. And then eventually everybody, speaking of this, it's interesting to see that everybody eventually has their snapping point. Um, because you even have, like with Rocky. Rocky's the one that seems like the most level-headed for a while. Even though the plan is his idea, it's kind of like, well, yeah, but he's got to defend Sam, his little brother. So it's like we kind of find it endearing that he's setting up this prank because it's in defense of Sam. And it's, relative. I mean, it would humiliate George for sure, but I mean, overall, it's not as bad as it could be by any means whatsoever. And the thing here, though, is that he's like the way he is on the phone with George, even though we know he's faking it for George, like being overly nice, it still kind of seems like in his real life he tries to act that way sincerely towards most people. He's the one where when Kyle and Jasper are being confrontational at the convenience store, he's the one that says like, "Oh, I'll just screw up," and just kind of tries to let it fall off his back and walk out. Um, but and we get the idea that that's probably the regular nature of his character. But then there's that one moment that seems like it comes from out of nowhere, where he finally reaches a snapping point, when George sprays him with the water gun, and he just snaps immediately, saying, "Don't you ever fucking do that again." And it's like it catches everybody by surprise. And it's at that moment when Rocky breaks that we realize, I feel like every one of these characters is going to have that moment eventually. And even Millie's kind of the same way. Millie's the one that's like, the moral center, like, this, like, she has no idea where this is going to go. But, like, when she just learns, oh, it's just a harmless prank, her response is, well, call it off or I'm going home. It's like she's really just that moral center. But then the second it builds up and George shows his true colors more and more, or what seemed to be his true colors more and more, um, Millie reaches that breaking point when he does the pussy number one, pussy number two thing, and we just see her go dark, and she's the one that sets the game of truth or dare off after she's the one that didn't want to play because she didn't want anybody's feelings to get hurt. Um, and once again, she also ends up in some really dark places. She's the one that she's the one that has the big freak out and tries to run away from the situation. And there's that moment that's like, when you compare the two moments, is really heartbreaking when she's just staring at the snail and then she just stabs it and kills it. And we see this really dark place she's gone to. And you think back to, like, one of her first scenes, or her second scene, when she's doing something so innocent as hanging out in her bedroom and she's preparing for her date with Sam. And she's just writing down, these are the things I'm going to say to Sam on our date. And it's like the most innocent thing you've ever seen. And to see that this character becomes the character that kills this snail is just like, you just really see the transition and what these events have done to these characters. The one with the most subtle breaking point, obviously, would be Clyde. Where he's the one that's always made fun of for, like, his dad's being gay, so the characters kind of assume that he's gay, even though we don't really go too much in that direction and find out, but, because it doesn't really matter, but, and everything is, like, so internalized, but then he does have, the thing here is that he does have a bit of a breaking point, like in the scene where he calls Marty a stupid fuck. But the great thing here that Ryan Kelly does, who plays Clyde, and once again the way he's written, is that we kind of expect, because he's the one that's kind of the quietest, and he's the one that seems to put up with the most shit and puts up with the most, ribbing and all that, that we kind of, and he's so internalized, we kind of expect just by nature that he's going to be the one that blows up the most. But no, his character stays kind of like right at that same level for most of the time. Like I said, him calling Marty a stupid fuck is the most we get in regards to a blow up from him. But that's not at all to say, that's not by any means to say that the performance is like one note or the character's one note. This is just very consistent with his character. which is really important in making him feel real, which both Kelly and the writer are able to pull off. And yeah, and it's just so impeccably cast, and it's with these actors in these particular parts, and it's incredible, especially amidst a young cast with material this heavy, that there's not a single weak link. Like even in like the small, tiny supporting roles, like I was talking about how good Brandon Williams is as Kyle, but then there's people like George's mom. George's mom is one of the most heartbreaking characters in the movie. The way we watch her react, she doesn't have any lines at all. When we see her when George is at home, he's just watching her, and she has no lines. And then when they come to the door, she doesn't say anything. And when they're at the crime scene, she doesn't say anything. But she reacts accordingly to all these things, and it's perfect for just really hitting home just how bleak and depressing this movie gets. Um, how we watch just everything come down in the second half, like that brotherly relationship between Sam and Rocky, how it was so endearing and so real, and just had those little details and those little interactions. And it's like by the time we get to the end, he just flat out tells Rocky, "I don't trust you," and it's just this really just cold, heartbreaking moment, but we totally get where it comes from, and it makes us see Rocky in a totally different way. I haven't praised Trevor Morgan enough yet here either, because the thing about Rocky is I was talking about that way where he seems so charming and endearing the way he does things. Like I said, the phone call with George, how it seems like he's putting on a front, and it's like that seems like the way he is with most people that he doesn't hate, and it's not a front. Like I said, he's the one that kind of extinguishes situations where they get out of control. But then you look back on it, and it's like Rocky came up with the idea. Rocky's the one that called him and set it up, and Rocky's the one that pushed him in the water. But the thing is that all these things don't seem that bad at the time. Like I said, the phone call seems like, he's just looking out for Sam, and it's a harmless prank and all that. When he pushed George in the water, there was a lot going on, and he was basically trying to break up a fight, trying to stop Marty from beating the shit out of him. But it was also kind of, I like the ambiguity, especially when it comes to the line at the end when the cop is asking Sam, was he in control or out of control? And obviously, Sam, I think, basically rats on him. But the thing here, though, is that it's like just one tiny itty bitty moment where it's like, it's sort of half he's trying to push him away from Marty, but half he's trying to shut George up and aggressively pushes him. Um, but that thing is like, was it the intention to get him completely off the boat and into the water? I would think not, but then again, the scene is so heated and so intense at this point. The way that Truth or Dare scene builds up, it's just really kind of hard to say in all of it. But yeah, it's very interesting to watch the way Rocky's character kind of changes. But it's not so much the way his character changes; it's the perspective from which people see him changes, which is really interesting. So yeah, and then like I said, it just gets more bleak and more depressing as it goes. That scene that's just it just turns my stomach, but in a really effective way when they're walking up to George's house, and it's like, we're about to tell this dude's mom that we accidentally killed him. And the light, like with the sensor, comes on above them, and it's like this really, it just, I don't even know the word I'm looking for, but it's this, yeah, it's really powerful stuff, and it's like, it doesn't feel like it's beating you over the head with its bleakness. It's just like, this is the direction this has to go, and there's really no other way around it after the bad decisions have already been made. Um, and I love the way that the movie is bookended with through George's camera, where we have obviously the opening when he beats up Sam for touching it, but then this ending where we take the stereotypical bully character, and it's like, and yeah, you could say it's also kind of a cliche that the bully character is just misunderstood or all that, um, but this really kind of hits home in a big way. Like, you could almost say it kind of spells it out a little bit, but I still think it works in a really effective way, which, like I said, Josh Beck's performance really does. The audio of his voice over them going to the crime scene just works in this really tragically beautiful way, extremely tragically. Um, and these scenes are so important about that. I noticed in the credit roll that Josh Peck actually has an additional videography credit because it's actually him holding the video camera for this footage. Um, so yeah, and lastly, it's got a great soundtrack. Occasionally, there are moments when the music kind of swells over the dialogue, like Ethan Gould's "Our Love Is Beautiful" playing over the waterfall scene, which is like one of my favorite scenes in the movie, and it's really doesn't mean a whole lot, but there's just something so beautiful about that scene, and the song is amazing. But for the most part, it just kind of is in the background, just kind of to be a mood setter behind scenes. And it all just works really well. The Tom and Andy score really works well as well. Um, and yeah, I've just admired this movie for so long. I feel like I've seen it so many times because it's one of those, those movies where, I don't know if everybody has this, but those movies that are so good that you don't watch them for like a really long time, but then when you do watch them again, you usually watch them for a second time very close together. So it's every time I watch Mean Creek, I usually watch it at least 2 or 3 times within a week or two, because despite how bleak and depressing it gets, it's just that impactful, and it's like I just can't look away from it or stop, and it's really does really takes this whole genre of like the bully drama to a whole other level. So that's not to well, so poor Charlie Banks here has to follow that. So going on to Charlie Banks, which came out very subtly in 2009, just in and out. It's we have a very familiar cast. Some who maybe weren't as familiar when it came out, but certainly are now. We've got Jesse Eisenberg the year before The Social Network, and we're set in the. We actually start off when they're kids in the 70s, and he sees the young version of the Jason Ritter character for the first time. Jason Ritter, who's going to be our bully for the movie. And this is a kid that was like infamous by the age of 10 for just having this ability to beat the holy shit out of people. And just kind of has this intimidating presence about him, like I said, even in his childhood. And we get a narration where Eisenberg's character tells us about, as if I don't know Eisenberg's character's name, it's in the fucking title. As Charlie narrates to us that he basically sees the character of Mick as like a boogeyman for his childhood. And then this kind of takes us into... Well, before we get into the 80s, there's also... We're kind of in the late 70s here, and we have this party where Eisenberg witnesses Mick beat the holy shit out of 2 dudes, and because the dudes are almost killed because the beating is so severe, Charlie turns him over to the cops, anonymously. Well, not anonymous to the cops, but Mick doesn't know who did it. And then this sets off a familiar chain of events, because we know they're going to run into each other again, and it's like, will he or will he not know that Charlie's the one that ratted him out? So the thing here is, what Eisenberg does here is he's perfectly cast, playing this sort of paranoia. But the interesting thing about the way he plays Charlie is that, obviously, Mick is a guilty person here. Mick almost killed 2 people, and Charlie did the right thing by going to the cops and telling them who did it so he could be arrested. But the thing here is that the way Charlie has to play this, once Mick comes back into the picture, is as if he's a guilty person. And so even though all he did was the right thing, he has to play the character now as if he himself is guilty of a crime, as he tries to kind of hide this fact from Mick, which is really interesting. And then that kind of transitions us into the 80s, which we know because there's a Raging Bull poster on the wall. And so we know it's post 1980 at least. Um, and yeah, and there's that moment obviously where he just comes back with his roommate Chris Marquette, and obviously Marquette is like the mutual friend to them. So he walks into his dorm and just unexpectedly sees Mick laying on his bed, hanging out. And it's like when we see that, we just kind of have this moment where our stomach drops, and how this must be the exact feel that Charlie has right now. Um, and the great thing about that, the reason that works is because of what Ritter brings to the table, which is interesting because Mick's supposed to be this really big, intimidating character that just any second is capable of beating the shit out of somebody, maybe almost to death, or maybe actually to death. But the thing is that Jason Ritter is not exactly physically imposing. But the thing about it, though, is that immediately he just kind of exudes this confidence and charisma that's needed for the role. Um, and it just actually he really brings it out. That every time you see this character, you feel like there's a constant impending threat. And the fact that he's able to do that just like almost right into his introduction really says something. There's actually a really great moment. I don't even know if it's intentional, but it's like, I would assume not, because it's sort of like Jason Ritter has a line that he says to Eisenberg that basically describes his performance. Where they're talking about, where they're playing a game of poker, and Charlie's losing a lot. So he's basically trying to tell him how to bluff, more or less. And so he says, your problem is that you're telling them how dangerous you are. You need to dare them to find out for themselves. And it's like, that's kind of exactly what Ritter does with this character. Is it's like he's not playing it to where he's trying to play up, how big and bad and, threatening it he is. He just comes in with the confidence and the charisma, and then we just kind of wait for that to happen, and he manages to find a way to get us to fully believe this character. Um, the other thing that it happens is he's really makes it conflicting, because we kind of know this character, the kind of character that he is and what he's capable of. And especially now that when we get the later scenes in the movie, when he kind of weasels his way into Charlie's life, and it's like he's basically trying to. There's a whole, I guess, commentary about the classes here, where he's kind of trying to come into the life of a rich person, particularly shown through Sebastian Stan's character, and it's like he's trying to come in from where he comes from, this very broken home type place, and trying to kind of find a place here, but it's really hard to tell if there's something sinister about this, or if he's genuinely trying to become a different person for the better. Reading Gatsby now and all that stuff. Because he's also found his way into the life of the girl that Charlie has a crush on. And the problem here is that not necessarily problem, because it once again shows the talent and Ritter's performance, is scenes like when he's explaining the bar fight, where a dude was killed, and it's like he's telling us in a way to where he sounds more or less innocent, like it got out of control and he was just defending himself. But the thing is like by this point, we really don't want to believe him, and we feel like that we can't, but he's just convincing enough, and that we wonder. Even though it's kind of in our minds, like, I feel like this guy's just lying out his ass. But even though we know there's something sinister that kind of always remains under him, regardless of how much he tries to change, he still somehow manages to find a way to make us wonder. Even if we're not fully convinced, we do question whether he actually is telling the truth or not. Which is a start with this character. But then we get moments that are like, the movie kind of seems to toy with our expectations in regards to, like, does Mick know or does he not? Like, we have the scenes when he's going to the classes now, But then he has the moment when he answers the question, he's talking about, like, ratting people out. And he's, like, staring Charlie down as he says this. And it's like, okay, he seems to know, but yet he chooses a public place to taunt him. And it's like, what can this mean? Like, what exactly is his angle? Like, what does he gain from that? But then the following scene, they're just having another normal conversation, and it's like you just constantly ask yourself through the movie, does he know or does he not know? And the movie seems to have fun a little bit toying with that, but almost seems like too dismissive of it at the same time. Um, but we do get some interesting looks into Ritter's character here. Like I said, he does have those unexpected moments to where it's like he's just met Charlie again for the first time since he went away, and it's like we think he doesn't remember him at first, but then he remembers him kind of, it seems seemingly at the last minute. But then, even though they're just newly reintroduced, it doesn't take long at all in this scene for Mick to, like, physically touch him and, like, go off on him, and, like, under the guise of, like, he was gonna go out instead of do his work, and so Mick, like, slaps him upside the head. But then it's like, it's almost like it's under a guise, as he says, how much are your parents paying for you to be here? You should do your work, man. And it's like he's being physically aggressive and trying to hide it under legitimate concern and, like, a noble quality. And it's like you kind of see through it almost right away, which really kind of shows off this scene, this very conflicting scene, when he beats up Sebastian Stan. Sebastian Stan throughout the movie is, like, the dude that basically is the one bringing him into this rich lifestyle and giving him clothes. He's the kind of guy that, like, wears pink and pops his collars and wears ascots. But the thing here is that the scene when Sebastian Stan is being very cruel to that girl that let him borrow the key, that she really needs back or she's going to lose her job. And he's just so cruel in the way he kind of, like, just sends her on a wild goose chase, and just kind of, because she's obviously, she has that quality about it where you can tell he seems to think that she's below him, and he just really takes advantage of her. And in this moment where, like, that's kind of a really shitty thing to do. He's being real shitty even if he's friends with our protagonists. And so, even though we've seen Mick be transparent before, like with the how much money your parents spending thing, we kind of take Mick's side on this when he confronts Sebastian Stan about being cruel to this girl. And it's only then that Sebastian Stan calls him out and says, like, dude, we know the noble act, you're not fooling anybody. And it's like the one time we were taking Mick's side, he is finally getting called out, and it's like, I suppose that's fair. But then, how are we supposed to feel, when he, his reaction to this is to beat the shit out of Sebastian Stan, and it's like, it's a very conflicting scene where it comes from the start. But it does, I suppose, add a complexity to the characters a little bit. So there is that. And it also kind of toys with his expectations, like, when Charlie actually does confess to him and say, by the way, I did it. But then that's immediately distracted by the fact that a character known only as Buzzy Tim is going to jump off the building, and everybody has to go out there to rescue him, and Charlie ends up saving Mick's life, basically. And once again, it's like he just totally ignores the fact that he knows now. And we wonder why that is. And it's like it's not even acknowledged. And it's also, we do also go on those expectations where it's like, we do get moments where we get just a little bit of Mick's backstory, just in little snippets, like the Curious George thing, and the way he kind of, like, wipes his eye as he walks away. So it's like, we do get that there's different angles to this, but it still feels like, Mick still feels like an antagonist the whole time. Which, I don't know, because obviously what it comes down to is we do learn why Mick just hasn't been didn't acknowledge the flat-out confession, or acknowledge the fact that he basically called Charlie out in the middle of a class and then never brought it up again. And it's the fact that he knew the whole time. But I don't know, revealing this in the last 15 minutes feels awfully like there's a lot of things in this movie that are revealed in the last 15 minutes that just kind of get us to a conclusion very quickly that feels very sort of unbalanced. Then it does bring us to our confrontation, where I do like the way the confrontation is portrayed, almost like as this really pathetic thing, where it's like we're watching a drunk guy fight this weaker guy who's probably never been in a fight in his life, and it's not played up as like this big ultimate battle or things coming to a head or anything like that. It just looks like two people having a really pathetic fight that's eventually broken up. And I suppose there is something real to that. Um, but then there's the whole thing of, like, Mick's kind of mythical, ambiguous getaway, which feels tonally like it's from a totally different movie. So I don't know. There are certainly things to like here, and it's not without moments of tension, and it's like I do maybe see an appeal to an extent of the wondering whether or not Mick knows or not, and kind of toying with that, but it doesn't fully come through, but it does have its moments. If there's one thing that Charlie Banks does that especially makes it fall short in regards to Mean Creek is the fact that where I talked about there's not a single weak link, even in the characters that don't have lines in Mean Creek. There are a few characters in Charlie Banks that seem to be crucial, but are more or less props. There's like Chris Marquette is basically he's always there, but he never feels like his character goes beyond just being the bridge that links Charlie and Mick. Like every now and then, there's scenes towards the end when he's in denial of Mick's true character, that are kind of decent scenes for him to play, but overall just don't really amount to anything really. There's Eva Amber, who is Susan Sarandon's daughter, and she's basically she doesn't really get to do a whole lot outside of she's the one that's kind of she's really kind of the breaking point here to where how much Mick has intruded on Charlie's life by basically taking the girl that he has a crush on or is in love with or whatever. And it kind of becomes that love triangle thing for a little bit. But which it doesn't focus too heavily on in the more expected directions, which is commendable. And then there's her friend. Well, I'm really not even sure what she's doing here, I guess because Chris Marquette's here. So that's... Yeah, there are definitely characters that just feel like they're there to basically progress things or act as props or whatever, which is unfortunate, which feels like we saw with Main Creek, it feels like there's so much potential if all your characters have at least a little something to do. But, I mean, I guess they can't all be as perfect as Main Creek, and all the characters have a lot to do. But, yeah, just overall, what it comes down to is this movie has basically a high that's it factor, to where it's like, there are so many things in this movie, whether it be, like, you know, the confession scene or something like that, and it's... Yeah, you just kind of leave it basically saying, I kind of thought there'd be more to that. And you can, you know, say it's because it's just so downplayed. And it's like, you don't want anything, like, too big in a movie this small, otherwise that would be, you know, just out of nowhere as the mythical getaway that Mick had. But, yeah, but it does kind of leave you wanting when you see the more confrontational scenes, or, like, and even like the beating that sets the whole movie off. It's like, even though he almost killed a couple of dudes, when you know it's the setting off point of the movie, even that scene you kind of leave like, well, that was kind of anticlimactic, I guess. And like I said, I suppose it's, you know, to try and downplay as much as possible, make it feel as real as possible, because, you know, you gotta sort of resort to the mundane, the more realistic you want to be, to a point. But this might have kind of crossed that line a little too much. So you do commend it for not going, like, the predictable thriller route and stuff like that. Um, but the scenes between them, I feel like, do need more tension than they have, for sure. That really would have added something. You can do that without necessarily turning the movie into a full-on thriller or anything. But it feels like it needs to be kind of, sort of building to something, which after a while it kind of doesn't. Once the more Mick falls in with them over time, it starts to feel more directionless as opposed to the other way around, which it should be doing. So yeah, but I mean, there's still plenty to like here, especially if you like movies that are really downplayed and movies that really kind of go against the directions they could be going. There certainly is something commendable here, so. And it is a good enough debut for Durst, for sure. But it's like the long shots came out the year before this, but I'm pretty sure I heard that this was shot first. So, and it did like festival runs and all that. So yeah, obviously this is no contest which one I prefer. I think Mean Creek is kind of like the high point of this genre. Like I think I prefer Mean Creek to Bully. Like Mean Creek is probably the best movie of this kind, exploring this territory. So that's yeah, it rarely gets better than that in regards to stories like this. So obviously Banks never stood a chance, but I felt like it was at least worth talking about for a little bit. So that's what we have. Next week, I think I know what I'm doing. We're gonna go definitely into kind of thriller, almost but not quite horror territory. And yeah, that'll be fun. So, and reviews and all that stuff, you know, all that stuff. So, until all that, I think that's